It all began with something that should have remained buried beneath layers of dust and decades of forgetfulness. On an ordinary Tuesday, in the silence of the basement archives of the New York Public Library, among endless shelves of blueprints and technical documents, a folder was discovered. Its very existence contradicted the official narrative of history. The label on it was unusual for a technical archive: Commercial Electric Systems, no longer in production. Inside was a detailed report by an engineer named Thomas Comerford Martin, titled Atmospheric Charge Collection Systems, Installation and Maintenance Protocols for Urban Buildings. These were not mere theoretical musings or the sketches of a futurist. The yellowed pages contained intricate technical diagrams, copper rods, receiving plates, and capacitor blocks integrated directly into the rooftops of Manhattan office buildings. It was a complete operational manual for a working system that extracted free energy straight from the atmosphere as far back as 1889. But the most chilling part of the document was its conclusion. A succinct handwritten note stated that the system had been decommissioned by municipal order and all evidence sealed by the mayor's decree. This technology was not simply replaced by something more advanced. It was ordered to be buried, erased from memory, and hidden from the public eye. From that moment on, the familiar world of architecture ceased to be just about aesthetics. If you look closely at any major building erected before 1900, through the eyes of an engineer, it reveals itself as a complex technical device. Massive metal domes, spires reaching for the sky, exquisite metal finishes covering surfaces, copper, bronze, and gilding at the highest points. Official history refers to these as the excesses of the Gilded Age, but the facts tell a different story. Fashion cannot adhere to identical technical specifications across continents with such mathematical precision. The domes of the Capitol in Washington, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg are not just similar. They are identical in proportions of diameter, height, and curvature. This is not style. It is function designed from a singular engineering template. Research into the electromagnetic fields surrounding such historical structures reveals anomalous results. The metal domes of European cathedrals demonstrate a charge accumulation capacity that exceeds typical passive structures by 300 to 400%. The geometry of these buildings indicates intentional design for capturing, rather than merely dispersing, atmospheric electricity. At ground level, sensors show standard values, but as one ascends to the base of the dome, voltage readings surge to 8 times above natural background levels. It turns out that Christopher Wren built a functioning electric collector in 1675, long before Benjamin Franklin officially discovered atmospheric electricity. Each of these majestic structures, from St. Peter's Basilica in Rome to government buildings in the United States, collects charge far beyond natural levels. The problem is that modern architectural theory lacks a satisfactory functional explanation for the prevalence of these metallic elements, which appeared centuries before lightning protection systems and significantly exceed any structural requirements. They are massive antennas designed to maximize contact with the electric field of the atmosphere. So how exactly did this global energy network operate, and why are its traces found in the most unexpected places? Despite the fact that official historians attribute the grandeur of 19th-century buildings to aesthetic excess, architectural evidence points to something much more fundamental. If we set aside tourist enthusiasm and view these structures through an engineer's lens, a remarkable pattern emerges. Around the world, buildings were constructed under a unified technical regulation. This isn't merely an architectural style, it's a functioning energy network disguised as temples and administrative palaces. A critical analysis of giants like the Capitol in Washington, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, or St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg reveals details that modern science refers to as architectural mysteries. These buildings do not merely feature domes, they incorporate identical elements in composition and form, massive iron and copper frames, gilded coverings at the highest points, and intricate systems of internal metal connections. For example, the dome of the Capitol, erected in 1866, is a colossal cast-iron structure rising over 80 meters, crowned with a bronze statue. Such elements consistently exceed any construction requirements of that time and were created long before the advent of official lightning protection systems. Measurements taken confirm suspicions. These domes are not passive. Modern research shows that the metal structures of cathedrals can accumulate an electric charge that is 300 to 400% higher than expected values for ordinary buildings. The geometry of the dome of St. Isaac's Cathedral, or St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, is perfectly tuned to capture atmospheric electricity. When voltage is measured at such points, instruments record sharp spikes, up to 1,500 volts per meter, significantly higher than the natural background. All of this points to a grand deception in the narrative of the Golden Age. We are told of primitive tools and manual labor, yet the mathematical identity of buildings across different continents, from the ratio of dome diameter to its height to the placement of spires, indicates the existence of a single global engineering template. The speed at which these complex structures appeared worldwide between 1850 and 1920 surpasses the logistical and communication capabilities of that era. It seems that these structures were not built from scratch as part of a fashionable trend, but rather restored or repurposed according to blueprints from a far more advanced civilization that understood the secret of extracting energy from the very air. What we have come to regard as decorative luxury was, in fact, the pinnacle of technological progress that has been deliberately erased from history textbooks. An invisible force has lingered in the atmosphere, the subject of meticulous study for decades, yet its findings have remained hidden from the public eye. Back in the early 21st century, electrical engineer Dr. Andrew Hall conducted an extensive investigation into the electromagnetic fields surrounding historical buildings. His findings, published in a specialized scientific journal, are nothing short of astonishing. The metallic dome structures of ancient cathedrals demonstrate a charge accumulation capability 3 to 4 times greater than any calculated values for ordinary buildings. This isn't just a random physical phenomenon, it's the result of precise engineering aimed at capturing, rather than merely dispersing, atmospheric electricity. Practical measurements confirm this hidden activity. A standard device for measuring electrical potential in the air shows typical values on city streets, around 150 volts per meter. However, as one approaches the base of ancient domes, the readings shift dramatically. At the base of St. Paul's Cathedral, instruments record 1,200 volts per meter, 8 times the natural background. Similar data comes from other architectural giants. The Capitol in Washington generates a field of 1,100 volts per meter. St. Peter's Basilica in Rome reaches 1,300 volts, and St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg hits 1,500 volts per meter. All these structures function as colossal energy collectors, built long before humanity officially learned to harness it. Even renowned architectural historians acknowledge the presence of mysterious elements in their works. The prevalence of massive metal components atop buildings constructed before 1900 remains inexplicable by classical theory. These elements far exceed any structural necessity and emerged centuries before lightning protection systems were officially recognized. Official science essentially admits its inability to provide a satisfactory explanation for the functionality of such constructions. Yet, the answer lies within documents that have long remained in the shadows. In the early 20th century, Nikola Tesla patented a device for harnessing radiant energy, explicitly noting the well-known fact that the Earth's atmosphere is charged with electricity, and that a vast potential difference exists between the ground and elevated points. Most importantly, he acknowledged that this principle had already been applied in various ways, albeit not widely publicized. There were operational systems where public buildings utilized atmospheric charges for internal lighting, employing copper rods on rooftops and specialized collectors in basements. These technologies worked efficiently, but their widespread adoption was limited not by technical challenges, but by purely commercial considerations. A system that draws energy from the air couldn't be metered, and that ultimately sealed its fate. Do you want to uncover how the financial interests of powerful magnates turned a technological breakthrough into a forbidden territory, and why the project aimed at providing the world with free energy was physically dismantled? The true reason behind the disappearance of these technologies lies not in their imperfections, but in their effectiveness. In 1903, Nikola Tesla was constructing the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, a structure nearly 60 meters high, topped with a 55-ton copper dome and anchored 36 meters deep into solid rock. Officially, it was a wireless radio transmission station, but the technical plans revealed something entirely different: a system for transmitting electricity through atmospheric resonance. The project was financed by J.P. Morgan, who invested an amount equivalent to a modern-day $5 million. However, everything changed when Tesla made a fateful mistake by confessing to the investor in a letter that his system would allow for the extraction of unlimited energy from anywhere on Earth, free for everyone. The reaction was swift. Morgan, whose wealth was intricately tied to General Electric, Westinghouse, and the model of paid resource consumption, halted funding with a single brief letter. For him and his business partners, free energy posed a threat to the existence of an entire industry valued in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Ultimately, the unfinished tower was dismantled for scrap metal in 1917. But Morgan was not the pioneer of this suppression strategy. He merely applied a method that had been used long before his time. The traces of a global energy cleanup led back to the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, famously known as the White City. The entire exhibition complex was illuminated by hundreds of thousands of light bulbs, heralded as a triumph of modern generators. However, reports from the chief engineer recorded strange anomalies. Buildings with massive domes and spires consumed significantly less electricity than calculations suggested. Visitors described the lighting as being fed by an invisible source, claiming that there weren't enough visible wires to account for such brilliance. Mathematical analysis confirmed the inconsistency. The total power of the bulbs exceeded the capacity of the installed steam generators by 2.5 megawatts. This raises the intriguing possibility that the pavilions themselves, built according to the same principles as ancient palaces, were generating the missing power. Just 6 months after the fair's closure, these monumental steel and stone structures were hastily demolished under the pretext of their temporary status. A similar fate befell hundreds of administrative buildings, parliaments, and courthouses around the world, constructed between 1850 and 1920. All of them featured identical conductive domes and deep foundations, as if following a single hidden blueprint that spread at a pace inexplicable by the communication technologies of that era. Gradually, it became clear that under the guise of urban renewal, a systematic dismantling of infrastructure capable of making humanity independent was taking place. How exactly was this global network structured, and why do even modern engineers find themselves puzzled when visiting ancient basements, exploring abandoned archives and conducting engineering analyses of buildings inevitably leads to one name that has been methodically erased from history books: Tartaria. This isn't just a geographical label found on ancient maps. It represents a global technological civilization whose understanding of physics surpassed our own. At the heart of their power lay the so-called Tartarian network, a sophisticated infrastructure for harnessing atmospheric electricity, traces of which are still scattered across all continents. The functional design of this network was brilliant in its simplicity and scale. It comprised 4 key components. The first was the collection points. those gilded and copper domes and spires that we now regard as religious decorations. They served as antennas, capturing ionized charges from the upper layers of the atmosphere. The second component was storage. In the basements of these buildings, modern researchers discover strange chambers lined with dielectric materials and remnants of massive capacitor batteries. The third element was distribution. The intricate metal ornaments on facades, grills, and even wrought iron fences weren't mere decorations. They were waveguides transmitting energy between buildings. Finally, the fourth component was grounding through colossal foundations, often extending deep down to the level of groundwater or magnetic ores, completing the circuit and creating a stable flow of power. Evidence of this system is hidden in the very foundations of cities. In the basements of old administrative centers around the world, from Europe to Siberia and America, copper rooms and massive blocks of magnetic ore have been uncovered, the purpose of which official history conveniently ignores. These findings suggest that buildings were constructed not merely as residential or public spaces, but as nodes of a global energy grid. Tartaria was not just an empire of territories, it was an empire of technology, where each city functioned as a self-sufficient power station, requiring no burning of coal or oil. The most unsettling question is why modern governments and scientific institutions fiercely resist acknowledging this fact. The answer lies in the magnitude of the loss. To recognize the existence of Tartarian technologies is to admit that humanity has been deliberately led down a false path of paid and polluting energy resources for the past century. The information purge was total, from rewriting encyclopedias to the physical destruction of key nodes in the network. What we now refer to as cultural heritage is merely the powerless remnants of a great organism that once supplied the world with limitless energy from the very air around us. But how did this purge actually occur? Why did cities that once buzzed with electricity suddenly fall silent? And what events of the 20th century served as a cover for the greatest heist in human history? The dismantling of the global energy infrastructure wasn't a sudden act. It was a methodical, decades-long campaign disguised as natural technological progress and urban renewal. When the old system was declared obsolete, cities faced a wave of reconstructions that were, in reality, surgical removals of key nodes in the atmospheric network. The most majestic buildings, which literally buzzed with an excess of accumulated static energy, began to vanish from maps under various pretenses. A shocking example of this cleansing was the story of Pennsylvania Station in New York City. This grand structure of pink granite, with its vast arches and abundance of metalwork, had a peculiar characteristic. Workers and passengers often reported a slight tingling when touching the railings and a barely audible hum that resonated from the upper ceilings during stormy weather. In 1963, despite protests from architects and the public, this engineering marvel was demolished. The official reason was unprofitability, but the true motive was revealed during the dismantling. Beneath the foundation lay an extensive network of copper bus bars and strange isolated chambers that had nothing to do with steam heating or sewage systems. A similar fate befell the White City in Chicago. Originally built as a temporary exhibition complex, it showcased the capabilities of a civilization that knew no energy shortages. After the exhibition closed, these monumental structures, capable of lasting for centuries, were destroyed with astonishing haste. An analysis of the surviving estimates shows that the costs of demolition exceeded the value of the buildings themselves, a logically inexplicable move, unless the goal was the complete eradication of a technical base that consumed less energy than it produced. The cleansing took place precisely when energy monopolies began to solidify their power. As cities started implementing systems for paid electricity metering, the old buildings with their free domes became dangerous witnesses to the past. Under the guise of fire safety, copper finials were removed from spires, and basements, acting as condensers, were filled with concrete or buried under construction debris. It was a war against architecture that remembered the truth. Every time you see an old photo of a city from the late 19th century, with its incredibly wide streets traversed by primitive carts, alongside buildings of complexity we can no longer replicate today, know that you are looking at a decommissioned power station. We've been led to believe that these giants were built for beauty by people who walked with candles, but the facts tell a different story. They were constructed for light that didn't require wires or bills. How does this suppressed science continue to break through decades of prohibitions, and why are modern corporations secretly returning to blueprints that are officially deemed pseudoscience? Despite decades of neglect and systematic destruction of evidence, knowledge about celestial electricity has not vanished without a trace. It continues to break through the veil of secrecy in the form of modern patents and scientific discoveries, which the official industry often presents as something fundamentally new. However, for those who have studied the blueprints of Tartaria, these innovations appear to be belated attempts to rediscover a path that has already been traveled. In recent years, major tech corporations and research institutions, such as the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and the engineering divisions of Hyundai, have begun registering patents for atmospheric charge collection systems. These devices suspiciously resemble 19th-century schematics. They utilize tall antennas coated with special conductive materials and capacitor systems to harvest energy from the air. The acknowledgement by modern scientists that there exists a colossal potential difference between the ionosphere and the Earth's surface, which can be harnessed as an inexhaustible power source, effectively confirms the words of Nikola Tesla spoken a century ago. What is most striking about these patents is the materials being used. In the ancient structures of Tartaria, copper and gold played a crucial role. Today's nanotechnology allows for the replacement of gold with graphene coatings, but the physical principle remains unchanged, harvesting free electrons from the atmosphere. We see how forbidden science is gradually re-entering the official discourse, but under the strict control of patent holders. What was once public knowledge in architecture is now becoming the private property of corporations. Engineers working on these projects often encounter the same issue. Modern buildings are poorly adapted for such energy. Unlike the structures of Tartaria, which formed a continuous conductive loop from spire to deep foundation, modern concrete boxes are isolated from the ground and atmosphere. Researchers acknowledge that if we built cities according to the principles of the Golden Age, utilizing their metal capacity and dome geometry, the energy crisis would have been resolved before it even emerged. The echoes of Tartaria can also be heard in the experiments of independent inventors. Around the world, enthusiasts are recreating miniature copies of atmospheric antennas, drawing inspiration from the shapes of ancient bell towers and obelisks. The results of their work, glowing lamps without batteries and functioning motors, serve as living proof that the technology has not perished. It is merely waiting for its moment until humanity realizes the scale of the deception. We find ourselves at a unique point in history, where ancient knowledge begins to be validated by modern formulas, making it increasingly difficult to conceal. This connection across time leads us to the final question. If the foundation for the return of these technologies has already been laid, how can we awaken the dormant cities, and what must be done to turn on this world again, reclaiming our right to free energy? The realization that we live among giant, dormant mechanisms transforms our perception of reality. Every old city is not just an architectural monument. It's a sleeping energy plant waiting for its moment. The buildings of Tartaria still remember what we have been made to forget. Their domes still reach for the charged skies, and their foundations, rooted in magnetic soil, continue to harness the planet's power. Technology hasn't vanished. It has simply been put on standby in the most visible place, right above our heads. Awakening begins with a shift in perspective. Once we stop seeing the copper spires and gilded cathedrals merely as religious symbols, the entire control system built on resource scarcity begins to crumble. The energy of the atmosphere is boundless, accessible, and, most importantly, inherently free. For centuries we've been led to believe that control over energy means control over people, which is precisely why Tartaria had to disappear. Yet the evidence has proven to be more enduring than empires. To turn on this world again, we don't need to build new power plants. We simply need to understand how the existing structures work. Measurement data, archival blueprints, and modern patents point to the same truth. We are surrounded by an ocean of electricity. All that humanity needs today is the courage to acknowledge the scale of the great heist of the past and to start utilizing the legacy that has always belonged to us. The ancient domes still capture energy, and the basements still hold the potential for change. This investigation is not just a search for lost facts, it's a key to the future. Once a critical mass of people understands that energy was and remains a free right of every inhabitant of Earth, the monopoly on resources will fall. We stand on the ruins of a civilization that knew neither electricity bills nor wars over oil. And these ruins are not just stones, they are blueprints for our future freedom. We only need to remember how to flip the switch that the Tartarian engineers left as a legacy. The world is ready for awakening, and the light that once flooded the streets of the white cities is poised to ignite once more. All it takes is to stop turning a blind eye to the obvious.
Subscribe, because what comes next is something you've never heard before.